Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic today, new one. Let's learn. Serious. Redditors who work in remote locations, research stations, etc. What are your creepiest experiences? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I work as a one-on-one in a hospital, pretty much just watch to make sure the patient doesn't rip out their tubes. And I was working nights, so it's basically a patient and myself in a dark room. One night I was with the patient in a double room, but the other bed was empty, though I couldn't see the other bed because a curtain divided the beds for privacy. Middle of the night, the nurse came in and asked if I needed anything because my call bell light was on. I told her that I never pressed the button, and it turned out it was the bell from the empty bed. The nurse just said, "Oh, that's creepy." I just left. I was freaked out the rest of the night. I've been working in my trade for about 20 years. It can be difficult to focus when all the young bucks are asking you questions and blaring terrible music, so I tend to start work when everyone else leaves for the night. I started hearing sounds upstairs like people talking, walking, opening doors. I dismissed it as my imagination for a few days, but it got to be too much to ignore. So I started to investigate when I would hear things. Never found anything, though I thought I was going crazy. Turns out, one of the guys that lived near the shop made a hidey hole nest up in the attic to hide from his girlfriend, like some kind of dumbass Phantom of the Opera. I was working 2 jobs on Black Friday, and after my first job at the mall was over, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., I headed to my other job. It was at a local bead shop in an old house. It was still dark when I got there, and we didn't open until 10, so I went inside to go sleep on the futon upstairs for a couple hours. When I opened the back door, I could see the silhouette of a person standing in the back room. They were about 20 feet away from me, but the street light was shining in through the window behind them, and I could see it perfectly. I froze for a couple seconds, thinking someone had broken in, then flipped the light on by the door. The silhouette vanished as soon as the light came on, and I said, "Oh, F that," and went to sleep in my car instead. I used to work overnight as a dispatcher, system monitoring most days. We had 2 people per shift. Pretty much the only reason we wouldn't be if someone was sick or something. Most nights were completely uneventful, basically did nothing for 8 hours. One night around 1 a.m., I hear screaming like some girl is getting murdered. My coworker and I both start checking cameras, nothing. I grab my radio and start running through the building to find this girl. Ran down to the first floor before I realized it was coming from the back parking lot. I exit the building, expecting to have to fight someone with a knife or see a rape or some shit. What I actually find is a girl alone in her car just screaming and crying. I find out she just wanted to vent and was seriously okay. She thought no one would be in the office park at 1 a.m. I promptly told her to knock it off, as it was absolutely terrifying, and to please leave. So, not really that scary, creepy, or strange at the end of it all, but it was absolutely the worst 2 minutes of my life as I was trying to find the screaming. To start off, I love listening to true crime podcasts. This summer, I worked by myself in a greenhouse at my university that was on the top 9th floor of the building. To even get into the building, you need card access, but to use the elevator, you need cards access and a key. Over the summer, almost 0 people were ever on campus, and especially not up to this floor or even in the building for that matter. After probably 6 hours of working alone on the top floor of this building and listening to creepy murder stories, I was pushing my cart to the elevator, a massive industrial freight elevator that no one else uses, and I scan my card and wait for the elevator to reach my floor. I can hear it coming, and it's taking a while, so I'm still listening to this podcast about some serial killer. Once it's finally at the 9th floor, I get ready to open the outer door and happen to peer into the little window and see something inside staring at me through the window. I screamed and jumped back, probably 2 feet before I realized I was just another research student coming up to use the greenhouse. Being alone for 6 hours and only hearing scary stories of people getting killed really messes with your nerves, lol. You think? I mean, seriously, what's the obsession with the macabre and listening to all these true crime podcasts? Says the guy who reads creepy stories every day. I get it. Broadcast engineer here. I have to babysit our transmitters when we broadcast live Broncos games. This was when Peyton Manning was on a tear a few years back, but I'm English and not a massive fan of the game in general, so oftentimes I'll read a book, usually horror or dark fantasy. Leaving this facility up on Lookout Mountain after a Broncos game is always a dark, poorly lit experience. This time, one of the outside lights had burned out, but the security cameras didn't show anything, so I trundled out as I always do. The dark patch is halfway between me and my car, and I wasn't really paying attention until I heard a snort, and looking up, saw two massive billowing streams of breath about 7 feet up. I thought it was Asmodeus, who I had been reading out that evening. My heart skipped, all the hairs on my everywhere stood up. Out of the darkness lumbers the biggest elk I've ever seen. He looked at me with mild disdain, huffed again, then turned and lumbered away, completely unimpressed by my 6 foot of Englishman, leaving me stood there, equal parts shocked, terrified, and relieved. I mustered up enough stiff upper lip to say, "Good night, Asmodeus," though I wager I didn't sound half as stoic as I was going for, then got in my car and went home. I used to work as a security in a super old theater that hosted a few theater plays a year, so the shifts were usually 12 hours or more. You open and you close and you just make sure all the people rehearsing for the theater play gets in and out, etc. First one in, last one out kind of situation. It was chill because I would be sitting behind a glass wall playing World of Warcraft for 12 hours, getting paid. I never got the creeps there, but it was haunted. Everyone believes so. But I was the only one apparently who believed it was a friendly ghost. The theater has offices on the 3rd floor, for example, where the old janitor 100 years ago would have his apartment before refurbished to offices. Well, every single key card to get into the main office door would get demagnetized. Doors wouldn't open in general, even with a standard key, and people in general felt pretty unwanted up there. No wonders when someone probably still lives there. This also happened on the doors in the foyer and the actual theater. Doors refused to open, keycards would stop working, people suddenly couldn't get out 1 minute and thought I had locked them in, while next minute the door shows no problem whatsoever and is easy to open. So, at the end of a long shift, where you most likely didn't see a single other person, walking downstairs to make sure all the lights are off, there are no more people inside and the doors are shut, and while walking back to exit, you see that the whole theater scene is lit up with studio lights, and there are literally no one left in the building. It might not be creepy, but it makes you question your own sanity, lol. Worked as a lab student in Uninvited. Look it up. Most northerly inhabited place in the world. Was there for my 2nd term. It was January, so total darkness. The lab I worked at was an atmospheric lab, so it was far from the main base, maybe 5 kilometers. Around the lab, there were lifelines leading to all of our instruments outside. However, on this particular Wednesday, which was flasking day, it was a little stormy, but nothing too serious. Since I was the student, I did all of the outside flasking. Basically, I loaded up a sleigh with evacuated flasks and would walk about 300 meters from the lab, open up the flasks, and then walk back to the lab. We would then send them south for analysis. Since we had to ensure that we got the best samples, we always had to walk into the wind. That means no lifeline. It was coming from a different direction every time. On this Wednesday, I had my little headlamp, walked out, and pulled my sleigh into the darkness, the darkest dark. I was a couple 100 meters out, and everything went dark. I turned around, the lab was gone, the station was gone, where we parked our truck was gone. I was alone, with only a headlamp and a sleigh of empty glass flasks. I panic. I have no radio, no phone, not that they would work up there anyways, and no clue where anything is. The wind was strong enough that I couldn't even find my tracks. I accept my fate and just stay put, heart racing. This is it. This is how I die. After the longest 2 minutes of my life, the power comes back on. This post was perfect. It fits right in line with the topic and is totally creepy because it's not necessarily supernatural, but it can absolutely be lethal. So glad you made it. Scary. I work from home as a telecommuter on a small farm on the west coast of Canada. My kids have frequent medical appointments in a larger city, so sometimes I'll be alone for days working. It was late fall, and here that means things get really dark at night. I heard a noise in the backyard, weird grunting, and leaned back in my chair so I could look out. Nothing. Pitch black. I walked over to the large sliding glass door and hit the switch for the backyard and found a bear going for the last few apples on a tree about 10 feet away. Either that, or the time the birds started eating the spoiled grapes off of the vine, and I kept hearing the thump of drunk birds hitting the window again and again. Luckily, they were really inebriated, so they just bounce off, stunned. I don't work at a research station, but I used to be a volunteer fireman and would spend a lot of time alone at the station. Was a college kid, new to the whole thing, and was so excited to take calls. A group of us would hang out a lot, but there were a lot of nights I'd just hang out alone. So I'm doing homework on the computer in the lounge upstairs when I hear the main door open up. It was on the first floor below the lounge. I figured it was another member and ignored it until they never came to say hi. After a while, I never heard anyone leave. It was always customary, if you stopped in and someone else was there, you went to say hi. When I was leaving that night, I found the main door wide open and ripped off the magnets that held it shut unless someone fobbed it. Called one of the captains and waited in my car for him to show up. He said those magnets aren't the easiest thing to rip a door open with, and with me being alone there, I was probably lucky I didn't go to investigate. I bartended at a bar in a tiny rural town on weeknights. Needless to say, there were rarely any customers. I worked there for about 7 or 8 months before anything happened. One night, I was washing dishes, and I heard someone whistling a tune by the men's bathroom. I turned around because I thought a customer came in. No one was there. For the rest of the night, I heard footsteps and whistling. After that night, this happened weekly. I told another bartender who said she heard a man's voice say, "Hello," from across the bar when she was the only one there too. I ended up quitting a few months later because I was so freaked out. Used to be a night janitor in a movie theater. We would go in at 4 and clean up until the doors opened at 11. To save time and our jobs, we would sometimes come in around the time the last movies were finishing and just sleep in one of the empty theaters, making sure we would be there when the shift started. Our basic MO was to use electric leaf blowers up and down the aisles of each theater, blowing popcorn and trash all the way to the bottom, then cleaning the seats up manually for anything gross or larger debris. This was expedient, but it was very loud, so it was easy to lose yourself in the work. Of course, the lights were on in the theaters to better assist in the cleaning, and usually we were the only ones there at the time. So whenever something strange happened, we would chalk it up to the other guy. There was one standing rule though, that we all followed to the letter. No one in the projection booth. There was no reason to go up there. We didn't clean it, all our supplies were downstairs, and most of all, it was haunted. There is a phenomenon that happens with theaters and projection booths. No matter what, you always feel like you're being watched. When you're walking around deaf from the sound of the blowers in an empty movie theater and you happen to glance up at the booth and there's unmistakably someone standing there watching you, you will shit your pants, especially when you go out into the hallway and find the other guy in his theater working, especially when you and he go to either end of the building, to the 2 exits of the booth, and trap whoever it was up there, and there's no one there. We just chose not to F with it. Years ago, I was an operations manager for an independent theater that had 3 theaters in it, and projectionists, at least the ones I knew, were creepy to begin with. The projectionist booths, yeah, I could get that ominous feeling at night when you're alone. So, and the leaf blowers made me remember when our cleaning crew would come. Anyway, thanks for sharing. Worked overnights in a gas station for a summer, and it was my responsibility to restock the fridges. We had a garage as part of the building, as well as a car wash. The stock room was across the shop, and in the back of it was the side entrance door to the car wash. It was a quiet night, and I was carrying an ambitious amount of inventory by hand. As soon as I set foot in the shop, I got the chills, and the hair on the back of my neck rose. I knew that logically I was safe, and that there was nobody there, but it felt like someone was watching or walking on my heels. Another time, I was in the cashier's booth with the steel door leading to the shop closed. There was a tiny window on the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young boy walk out of the garage door. The overhead door was obviously closed, and the path he was going definitely led out there. My dad worked at the haunted Toys R Us in Sunnyvale, California. He worked as a night watchman back in the day to pay for school. Cool gig, got to sit around and study while being paid for doing next to nothing. Learned to juggle and play guitar too. Weird stuff happened there all the time. Objects would fall off the shelves as you walked past them. Lights flickered on and off from time to time. Noises from the other side of the hall, stuff like that. So there he was in a big, mostly dark store all by himself, thinking about the ghost. He said out loud, "If there's a ghost here, then that balloon, the red one, in the middle of the roof, will pop." Right as he finished the sentence, the balloon burst. Suffice to say, he turned on all the lights in the building and got as close to a door as he could for the rest of the shift. I work in a liquor store. I do closing shifts alone for several hours in the shop until 10:30 or so. I'll regularly be in the cooler and hear footsteps in there with me. There's pretty much nightly. Also, one time I was counting down my till well after closing and heard a bottle clank somewhere in the store. Walked over and found a bottle of wine standing upright on the floor in the middle of the aisle. I had just done my nightly walkthrough to make sure all the shelves were in order. I had also just mopped the floor. The tiles were still wet with a single footprint leading up to or away from the bottle. I logged into the CCTV system and started looking back through the past 30 minutes for the particular aisle. Nothing. At one point, that particular camera just blipped out, and when it came back, the bottle was there.